Hello again. I think in this exercise I want to show just a little trick or technique to take a portion of this image, um, this particular gradient that goes from the horizon grayish tint over to reddish orange and then into the dark blue, and I'd like to basically collect that into a gradient that I can use for as a rectangle image basically. So let's see. What I did is actually I loaded that into the general file converter. It's a very high resolution image. If you don't zoom to fit, you can see that it's got a lot of space to drag through here, and then also some detail, a lot of grains, a lot of noise, a lot of granularity. It was shot at low light and high sensitivity. So when I sent this into Dog Waffle, we can zoom in here with the right button, and Control Shift down, or I can do 100% to show me as is, or I can show it fit, and I'll see the entire image at maximum size possible. And what I need to do first of all perhaps is to, well, it would be up. I need to rotate it by 90 degrees if I wanted to see it, but it actually doesn't matter at this time. I'd really like to just capture a portion. So I'm going to use the rectangle selection tool here and grab something like this here. So give it the area that you want to keep, and it doesn't matter if there are parts of the tree still showing, we'll cut them off later, but I'm going to try to avoid that and basically select my rectangular area here. You could zoom in after that to see if it's close but not overlapping. Yeah, see over here there might be a little bit of an overlap, but that's okay. We'll just trim it a little bit more. What's important is to get much of that range going from the gray, so let's do it a little bit smaller, a little bit more narrow, from about here. There you go, about this much. And now let's go to image and crop it, right? Crop to selection. That will crop to that narrow band of the gradient. So we have basically a gradient that we can use here. If you want to use that for, as a filled rectangle, you can turn this image into any sort of rectangular size. You can rotate it, put that into the background. Can make this a stampable brush image. We can probably use this as a gradient also. So there's a variety of tools to explore there. But before we do that, one thing that I think I want to do is get rid of that granularity, that noise, the grain that's in there. And so to explore that, there's really kind of two techniques that come to mind, and there may be others, but one of them is to actually use the noise reduction capability. And we'll see that sometimes works if you have some details you want to keep. If you had some tree shapes or some, I don't know, power lines or some other poles or other details, maybe a bird flying across in the background, and you'd like to keep that, but you'd like to get rid of much of the small noise. So to do that, you would go into the filters and find the noise and the noise removal filter in there in particular. Right. So the noise removal actually had some changes recently. I think that was done in 8.1, and since there was no 8.1 release for the artist edition, now in 8.2 you'll see that as well. 8.2 artist is what I'm using here, and you could let the threshold at 32. You might actually reduce that even lower, but let's just use the default, but use them and not use the threshold box filter, but the new median option. Give that a go. And after a little while you'll see that it will have gotten rid of quite a bit of the noise. Not everything, again, it depends on these parameters, and you may need to experiment with those a little bit. This does take quite a while though. This is a rather compute intense proposal there in operation, so give it a few more seconds. It could be even a minute or so. I'm going to pause this and come back when it's done. And we are now almost done, so here we go. Okay, so now I'm going to capture that, store image copy, so we have a snapshot of that, and we can go and look at it and compare it to perhaps the original, the prior. Let's go and do an undo, and we see the granularity come back there, the noise, and store that one as well. So we have a comparison side by side of before doing the cleanup and after doing that cleanup. So you can see that if you click on this one here, you'll see that's the cleaned version. This one here, you click that, you still see the noise. Let's zoom in a little bit more, and you'll see the noise particularly well in the red area, but you know, pretty much anywhere. You click here, you'll see the original with the noise. Click this one, you'll see the noise has gone. It's still there a little bit, and again, that depends on how much you know, you set these parameters for removal of noise. If there are no details that you need to keep there, you can be more strict. You know, you can remove more noise, and so you just experiment with these parameters. Again, that was under the filter menu, and then noise, and then noise removal. All right, so there's a couple of you might want to try, for instance, just 4 or 5, or you might want to go to 55 or even higher for the threshold, right, and see what that does. But let me try the fine one here, perhaps fewer count, and do the median and give that another go and see if that further reduces it. But you'll see that that takes a lot of time. Now, sometimes that's really the right thing to do. Again, if you have some details that you want to keep, maybe the shadow or the shape of a bird that's flying across the sky, and you don't want that to be totally gone and disappear in the blur. But if you have a picture like this where you only want to keep that gradient, then really this may not be the better technique. What you might want to do instead, and let me load back to the original with all that grain, is to simply do a blur, right? If you do a blur like a Gaussian blur, you can very quickly see that it's getting rid of blurring any little detail, and very quickly you'll see, you know, you'll see all that granularity, that noise is gone. And so at that point you have probably a pretty perfect sky gradient that you can use. Yeah, there you go. So I'm going to store that one, and that's probably what I'll use. Store image copy. And then at this point you might want to perhaps rotate it, or, you know, save it as a gradient, or, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to work from that. You could, for instance, first of all, if you have that image in there, let's go and close the others, or at least minimize them. So this is our working one. Now we can resize it. We can say, well, we don't need it going this thin. We could resize, go to the image menu and select resample. There it is. And in the resample option, you see how wide it is, 3,800 pixels, and only 450 high. So what we'll probably do is make it only about 720, and the height will be 1280. And that will rotate later on, right? So right now the width goes where eventually we'll have the height. So we have this. Now we can rotate it. Let's go excuse me, that's an image manipulation, rotate. That would be a counterclockwise by 90 degrees, and there we go. So now we have our nice gradient as a background image that we can use as a starting point, or we can, you know, put it into a brush. And let's pick this entire image as a brush. If you enable preview, you can see it's there. Not at 100% opacity. Let's give it the maximum opacity. There you go. So now if you draw anything that would be there first, you could later on stamp this cloud in, or this background color in, or you can go and just draw right on that. And that's the idea. It's to, you know, to work from an initial photograph with almost perfect gradients or color changes, but then you don't like the grain, that noise that was in there. And we saw that with the Gaussian blur and some other techniques, we can quite nicely eliminate that. One other technique that you could have used there, by the way, is let's go back to this one, or what was the other? This one here with all the grain in it. Oh, and of course it's at a different size now, so that won't work. So let's go undo that. But one other technique that you could have used perhaps would be the bokeh blur. That gives some nice results too. So that's another one to explore. Has greatly been improved in 8.2, and if I'm not mistaken, that one also uses the GPU. So if you have GPU capability enabled, it will be responsive and fast, and create some really great results there too. Alright, well, that's it for this quick little demo, and thanks for watching, and we'll be back with more really soon.